Let me tell you about the most decorated, undecorated Marine I ever knew. Name's Frank Rodriguez, but everybody called me Gunny back in my Corps days. I'm 68 years old, did 2 tours in Vietnam, and for 15 years I lived next door to a man I thought was just another old-timer telling tall tales. Turns out Jimmy Murphy was the hero America owed a 70-year-old debt, and I was too stubborn to believe him until it was almost too late. This story's gonna make you madder than a hornet's nest, but stick with me. The ending's worth every minute of heartbreak along the way. It was summer 2023 in Phoenix, Arizona, hot enough to fry an egg on the sidewalk, and there was Jimmy Murphy at 7 in the morning, pushing that ancient mower across his brown patch of grass like he was trying to make it presentable for company that never came. 82 years old, skinny as a fence post, wearing the same faded Marine Corps t-shirt he'd had since I moved in next door. Every morning, same routine: mow the tiny yard, check the mailbox for his Social Security check, sit on his porch with a cup of coffee that looked like motor oil. And every morning, if you gave him half a chance, he'd start telling stories about Korea. Now, I'll be honest with you, I thought Jimmy was full of shit. Don't get me wrong, I could tell he'd served. Guy carried himself like a Marine, had that bearing you never lose. But the stories he told? Saving 23 Marines at some place called Chosin Reservoir? Single-handedly holding off Chinese forces for 6 hours? Using captured enemy weapons when his ammo ran out? Come on! If that was true, where were his medals? Where was his recognition? Where was his military pension? Jimmy Murphy lived on $800 a month Social Security in a duplex that should have been condemned 10 years ago. Windows held together with duct tape, air conditioning that worked when it felt like it, and a refrigerator that sounded like a diesel engine trying to start. That's not how you treat a Medal of Honor recipient. That's how you treat a guy who maybe served a couple years and spent the next 50 embellishing his stories. At least that's what I thought. See, I'd done my time in Vietnam, got my Purple Heart, came home and built a decent life. Construction foreman for 30 years, paid off my house, put my kids through college. When my wife passed 5 years ago, I figured I'd live out my days quietly, maybe help some younger veterans figure out the VA system. But Jimmy was everything I tried not to become. The old veteran living in the past, boring neighbors with war stories nobody believed, getting more bitter and forgotten every year. I was polite to him, sure. We'd nod when we checked our mail, maybe talk about the weather. But when he started up with the Korea stories, I'd find an excuse to go back inside. "Frank, did I ever tell you about the night we got surrounded at Chosin?" he'd say, and I'd already be backing toward my door. "Not today, Jimmy. Got to get to the store before it gets too hot." Truth is, I was embarrassed for him. 70-year-old war stories from a guy living on food stamps? Come on. But then his family showed up for what turned out to be a very different kind of visit than I expected. It was a Saturday morning in late July, and I was watering my plants when this rental car pulled up in front of Jimmy's place. Out stepped his granddaughter Linda, mid-40s, all business, wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than Jimmy's monthly rent. Behind her came 2 teenage kids who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world, and a man I assumed was Linda's husband checking his phone every 30 seconds. I could hear the conversation through Jimmy's paper-thin walls. "Grandpa, we're worried about you," Linda was saying. "Living alone at your age in this neighborhood, telling these stories to the neighbors." "Stories?" Jimmy's voice got sharper. "Linda, I told you about Korea." "Grandpa, please, we've been through this. You were a mechanic in Korea. You fixed trucks. You never saw combat." I stopped watering and listened closer. "I was infantry, 1st Marine Division. I fought at Seoul, at Incheon, at Chosin Reservoir." "Grandpa, stop. You're embarrassing yourself and us." The teenage boy, maybe 16, piped up, "Grandpa, why don't you have any medals if you did all that stuff? My friend's grandfather was in Vietnam. And he's got a whole display case." Jimmy was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Some medals got lost along the way, son." "Lost?" Linda's voice was getting impatient. "Grandpa, the military doesn't just lose Medal of Honor recipients. If you'd really done what you claim, there'd be records, documentation, something." "There are records, somewhere." "Where?" "We've looked. Your discharge papers show you were a motor transport mechanic, not infantry. You never received any combat decorations." I heard Jimmy sigh, the kind of sound that comes from a man who's had this argument too many times. "Maybe you're right, Linda. Maybe I'm just a foolish old man." But there was something in his voice, something defeated and hollow, that made me put down my hose and really listen. Linda's husband spoke up for the first time. "Jimmy, we're not trying to hurt your feelings, but these stories, they're affecting how people see our family. The neighbors think you're, well, crazy?" "Confused," Linda said gently. "Grandpa, you're 82 years old. Sometimes older people mix up memories, or—" "I remember every detail of November 27th, 1950, Jimmy said quietly. "Chinese forces hit us at Chosin. Temperature was 30 below zero. My platoon got cut off from the main force. 23 Marines, some of them just kids, wounded and trapped." "Grandpa!" "I remember Corporal Danny O'Brien from Boston took shrapnel in both legs. Private Rodriguez from Texas, bullet through his shoulder. Sergeant Mike O'Sullivan from County Cork, like my grandfather, bleeding from his head, but still trying to coordinate the evacuation." The specificity of Jimmy's memories, the way his voice changed when he talked about his fellow Marines, made me stop watering completely and just listen. I remember using a Chinese machine gun when we ran out of ammo for our M1s. I remember carrying Rodriguez 200 yards through the snow while Chinese forces were shooting at us. I remember O'Sullivan writing something in his notebook right before the evacuation, said it was important, said somebody needed to know what happened. "Grandpa, please." I remember coming home and waiting for the recognition O'Sullivan promised me. Waiting and waiting while other Marines got their medals, their benefits, their parades. Waiting until I realized nobody was coming to pin anything on my chest. The rental car door slammed. "We're leaving," Linda announced. "Grandpa, please consider what we talked about. There are nice facilities for seniors, places where you'd be around people your own age, where you wouldn't have to worry about these fantasies." After they left, I heard Jimmy's screen door creak open and close. When I looked over, he was sitting on his porch, staring at nothing, looking older than his 82 years. For the first time, I wondered if maybe I'd been wrong about him. That night, I knocked on his door. "Jimmy, you got a minute?" He opened the screen door, surprised. In 15 years, I'd never actually been inside his house. The place was neat as a pin, everything in its exact place, the way Marines are trained to keep their gear. On one wall hung a faded photo of young Marines in winter gear, and another of a transport truck. "That you?" I asked, pointing to the truck photo. "Yeah, that's me. Motor transport mechanic, just like Linda said." He looked at the photo for a long moment. "That was my cover story." "Cover story?" Jimmy sat down heavily in his recliner, the kind of chair that probably came from Goodwill, but was cared for like it was made of gold. "Frank, can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone else?" I settled into the chair across from him, noting the way he kept his back straight, military bearing even in his own living room. In 1950, the Marine Corps was still figuring out how to fight a new kind of war. We needed Marines who could move behind enemy lines, gather intelligence, work with irregular forces, guys who could blend in, who wouldn't be missed if they didn't come back. He looked at me directly. "I wasn't really a mechanic, Frank. I was what they'd call special operations today. Reconnaissance and direct action. The mechanic thing was my cover in case I got captured." "Jimmy, the night we got hit at Chosin, my real unit was attached to a regular Marine company. We were supposed to be gathering intelligence on Chinese troop movements, but when the shooting started, there wasn't any difference between special ops and regular infantry. We were all just Marines trying to get each other home alive. Jimmy got up and walked to an old wooden chest in the corner. He pulled out a small notebook, pages yellowed with age. "This was Sergeant O'Sullivan's. He gave it to me before he died on the evacuation chopper. Said it contained his recommendation for my Medal of Honor." He handed me the notebook. O'Sullivan's handwriting was faded but legible. "CPL James Murphy, USMC, distinguished himself by conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty while serving with 1st Marine Division at Chosin Reservoir, Korea, 27 November 1950. The entry went on for 3 pages, describing in detail how Jimmy had stayed behind with wounded Marines, fought off Chinese forces for 6 hours, and personally carried or assisted 23 Marines to safety. "Frank, this notebook is all I have left of that night. O'Sullivan died before he could file the official recommendation. And because my assignment was classified, there weren't any other witnesses who knew my real identity." I stared at the notebook, feeling something shift in my chest. This wasn't the rambling of a confused old man. This was precise, detailed, written in the immediate aftermath of combat by a man who knew he might not survive to tell the story. "Jimmy, why didn't you ever show this to your family? Would you believe a story like that if someone just showed you a handwritten notebook? Hell, I wouldn't. Anyone could write something like this. But there must be other records. Frank, in 1950, Marines like me didn't officially exist. My real service record is probably buried so deep in some Pentagon filing cabinet that nobody alive remembers it's there. That night, I went home and did something I should have done 15 years earlier. I started researching Jimmy Murphy's story. What I found changed everything. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir was real. The dates matched. The 1st Marine Division was there, and buried in military history websites, I found references to reconnaissance Marines attached to regular units, their identities kept classified for security reasons. I found a Marine Corps historical website that listed casualties from the Chosin Reservoir. Sergeant Michael O'Sullivan, KIA, November 28, 1950. Corporal Danny O'Brien, WIA, November 27, 1950. Private Roberto Rodriguez, WIA, November 27, 1950. Every name Jimmy had mentioned was real. The next morning I walked over to Jimmy's house and found him sitting on his porch, staring at his hands. "Jimmy, I owe you an apology." He looked up surprised. "I spent last night reading about Chosin Reservoir, about reconnaissance Marines, about everything you told me. Frank, Jimmy, I've been living next to a hero for 15 years, and I treated you like a crazy old man. I'm ashamed of myself." For the first time since I'd known him, Jimmy Murphy smiled. "Frank, you're not the first person who didn't believe me. After 70 years, I'm used to it." "Well, you shouldn't have to be used to it, and maybe it's time we did something about that." Jimmy looked at me like I'd suggested we fly to the moon. "Frank, I'm 82 years old. I've got lung cancer that's probably going to kill me in the next 6 months. What's the point of fighting a 70-year-old battle now? Because it's not about you anymore, Jimmy. It's about every Marine who ever got forgotten by the system. It's about making sure the truth gets told while you're still here to tell it." That's when I told Jimmy about his great-granddaughter, Katie. See, I'd done some more research after our conversation. Found out Katie Murphy was a cadet at West Point, studying military history. If anyone could help us prove Jimmy's story, it would be someone with access to military archives and the training to know what to look for. "Jimmy, you need to call Katie. Tell her everything you told me. Let her decide if it's worth pursuing." "Frank, Katie's busy with school. She doesn't need her crazy great-grandfather bothering her with old war stories." "Jimmy, Katie's studying to be an officer in the United States Army. Don't you think she'd want to know that her great-grandfather is one of the bravest Marines who ever lived? It took me 3 more visits to convince Jimmy to make that phone call. But finally, on a Saturday morning in August, he dialed Katie's number. "Katie, it's your great-grandfather, Jimmy." "No, I'm fine, sweetheart. Katie, I need to ask you something. Are you familiar with the Battle of Chosin Reservoir?" "Yes, that's right, Korea." "Well, I was there." I watched Jimmy's face change as he talked to Katie. For the first time in years, someone in his family was taking his story seriously. "She's coming to visit," Jimmy told me after he hung up. "This weekend? Says she wants to hear everything." Katie Murphy arrived on a Friday afternoon in August, and I could see immediately where she got her backbone. 20 years old, about 5'6", but she carried herself like she could take on the world. She hugged Jimmy like she meant it, not the polite family hug I'd witnessed from Linda. "Great-grandpa, tell me about Korea. All of it. Start from the beginning." For the next 6 hours, Jimmy told Katie his story. She took notes on a legal pad, asked specific questions about dates, locations, unit designations. This wasn't a college kid humoring her elderly relative. This was a future military officer conducting a professional interview. "Great-grandpa, do you have any documentation? Anything at all?" Jimmy showed her O'Sullivan's notebook, the faded photographs, his discharge papers that listed him as a mechanic. Katie studied the notebook for a long time, comparing it to something on her laptop. "Great-grandpa, I think Sergeant O'Sullivan was trying to file an official Medal of Honor recommendation. The language in this notebook matches the format used in 1950. Katie, that notebook is 70 years old. Nobody's going to believe it's authentic." "Maybe not by itself, but it gives me places to look." Katie spent the rest of the weekend at the Phoenix Public Library, researching military archives, calling her professors at West Point, making a list of places where official records might exist. Sunday night, before she flew back to New York, she sat down with Jimmy and me. "Great-grandpa, I can't promise anything, but I think your story deserves to be investigated properly. Will you let me try?" Jimmy looked at this young woman who believed in him when his own family didn't, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in 15 years. Hope. "Katie, if you think it's worth your time, then yes, I'd be honored." 3 weeks later, Katie called Jimmy with news that changed everything. "Great-grandpa, I'm at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. I found something." "What did you find, sweetheart?" "I found a box of misfiled Korean War Medal of Honor recommendations. Great-grandpa, your name is on one of them." I was sitting with Jimmy when Katie called, and I watched the color drain from his face. "Katie, are you sure?" "Great-grandpa, I'm holding the original recommendation written by Platoon Sergeant Michael O'Sullivan. It's dated November 28, 1950, the day before he died. It describes everything you told me, with witness statements from 12 Marines you saved." Jimmy sat down hard in his chair. "Katie, what does it say about why I never received it?" There was a long pause on the phone. "Great-grandpa, it's stamped disapproved by Colonel William Ashford. There's a handwritten note. Insufficient Protestant character witnesses." The silence in Jimmy's living room was deafening. "Protestant character witnesses?" Jimmy's voice was barely a whisper. "Great-grandpa, I found 11 other recommendations in the same box, all for Catholic Marines, all disapproved by the same Colonel Ashford, all for the same reason." That night, Jimmy and I sat on his porch until midnight, not talking, just processing what Katie had discovered. "Frank, I always wondered why my recommendation never went through. I thought maybe it got lost in the chaos after O'Sullivan died. I never imagined—" "Jimmy, you were denied the Medal of Honor because you were Irish Catholic?" "Looks that way." "That's not just wrong, Jimmy, that's evil. Frank, this was 1950. Things were different then." "No, they weren't. Not when it comes to Marines taking care of Marines. That Colonel Ashford betrayed everything the Corps stands for." Katie called again the next day with more information. She'd found Colonel Ashford's personnel file, his fitness reports, his correspondence. What she discovered painted a picture of systematic religious discrimination that went far beyond Jimmy's case. Great-grandpa, Colonel Ashford, wrote letters to other commanders about maintaining Protestant leadership in combat units. He believed Catholic Marines were unsuitable for positions requiring moral courage. Katie, what do we do with this information? We make sure everyone knows what really happened. I'm posting this on social media. Katie, honey, nobody's going to care about an old man's war story. Great-grandpa, you saved 23 Marines' lives and were denied recognition because of religious bigotry. People are going to care. Katie was right. Her first TikTok video showing Jimmy's story and the documentary evidence got 50,000 views in the first hour. By the end of the week, it had reached 2.3 million people. The video showed Katie holding up the original Medal of Honor recommendation, comparing it to the stories Jimmy had been telling for 70 years. She read excerpts from Colonel Ashford's letters explaining how systematic religious discrimination had denied recognition to dozens of Catholic Marines. But the most powerful part was Katie interviewing Jimmy, asking him to tell his story one more time for the camera. Great-grandpa, tell people what happened at Chosin Reservoir. Jimmy, sitting in his faded recliner, looked directly at the camera and spoke with the clarity and precision of a Marine giving a situation report. November 27, 1950. Chinese forces hit our position at Chosin Reservoir. Temperature was 30 below zero. My platoon got separated from the main force. 23 Marines wounded and trapped. I stayed behind to get them out. How long did you hold off the Chinese forces? 6 hours, until the evacuation chopper could get close enough to extract the wounded. And you never received recognition for this? No, ma'am. Sergeant O'Sullivan wrote up the recommendation, but he died before he could file it officially. Turns out it got filed anyway, but some colonel decided I wasn't the right kind of Marine to receive the Medal of Honor. What kind of Marine were you, Great-grandpa? Irish Catholic, ma'am. Wrong religion for Medal of Honor recipients, according to Colonel Ashford. The video went viral overnight. Comments poured in from veterans, military families, historians, and ordinary Americans who were outraged by what they'd learned. But the comment that mattered most came from Dr. Michael O'Brien, a military historian who specialized in Korean War research. Ms. Murphy, I've been studying Korean War Medal of Honor recipients for 20 years. Based on the evidence you've presented, your great-grandfather's actions exceeded the criteria for our nation's highest military honor. This case needs to be reviewed by the Pentagon immediately. Dr. O'Brien wasn't just any historian. He'd consulted on congressional investigations, advised the Pentagon on military awards policy, and written definitive books on Korean War combat operations. When Dr. O'Brien confirmed Katie's findings, major news outlets picked up the story. CNN interviewed Jimmy at his house, with me sitting beside him for moral support. The reporter asked him how he felt about being denied recognition for 70 years. Ma'am, I didn't serve for recognition. I served because those were my Marines, and Marines don't leave Marines behind. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt to watch other men get parades while I got food stamps. Fox News ran a segment on Forgotten Heroes, interviewing other veterans who suspected they'd been denied recognition due to discrimination. Irish-American organizations demanded a Pentagon investigation. Catholic military organizations called for a review of all Medal of Honor decisions from the 1950s. But the moment that really got to me was when Jimmy received a phone call from someone I'd never expected to hear from. Mr. Murphy, this is Colonel Patricia Santos from the Pentagon Medal of Honor Review Board. We need to talk. Colonel Santos had read Katie's research, consulted with Dr. O'Brien, and personally reviewed the archival evidence. She was calling to inform Jimmy that the Pentagon was opening an official investigation into his case. Mr. Murphy, based on preliminary review, your case appears to meet all criteria for expedited consideration. However, I need to be honest with you about timing. Ma'am, Mr. Murphy, are you familiar with your current medical prognosis? Jimmy looked at me, and I knew what the colonel was asking. Jimmy's lung cancer was advancing rapidly. Recent scans showed the disease spreading despite treatment. Colonel, my doctors tell me I probably have 3 to 6 months. Sir, I'm going to do everything in my power to expedite this review. You shouldn't have to wait another day for recognition, let alone another 70 years. What Colonel Santos didn't tell Jimmy at the time was that she had a personal stake in getting this right. Her grandfather had been a Mexican-American soldier in World War II who faced similar discrimination. She knew what it meant to have your service questioned because of your background. Over the next 6 weeks, Colonel Santos worked 18-hour days reviewing Jimmy's case. She interviewed the 3 surviving Marines Jimmy had saved at Chosin Reservoir. She consulted with Korean War historians, reviewed Medal of Honor criteria, and built an airtight case for Jimmy's recognition. But bureaucracy moves slowly, even with a motivated colonel pushing it forward. 2 weeks before Jimmy's 83rd birthday, we got devastating news. The Pentagon legal review was going to take another 3 months, maybe longer. There were questions about precedent, concerns about opening floodgates for other historical cases, bureaucratic resistance to second-guessing past decisions. Jimmy took the news with typical Marine stoicism, but I could see it was killing him. He'd gotten his hopes up, maybe for the first time in 70 years, and now it looked like he was going to die before receiving the recognition he'd earned. That's when Katie made a decision that would change everything. She called a press conference at the Phoenix VA Medical Center. Katie, Dr. O'Brien, and 3 surviving Marines Jimmy had saved at Chosin Reservoir stood together and demanded immediate action. "My great-grandfather is dying," Katie told the assembled reporters. "He has served this country with honor and distinction, saved 23 Marines' lives, and was denied recognition for 70 years because of religious bigotry. How many more days is the Pentagon going to make an 82-year-old war hero wait for justice?" One of the surviving Marines, now 89 years old, spoke directly to the camera. "Jimmy Murphy carried me 200 yards through enemy fire when I was 19 years old. I've had 70 years to live, to raise my family, to see my grandchildren grow up because of what Jimmy Murphy did. This man deserves the Medal of Honor, and he deserves it while he's still alive to receive it." The press conference made national news. Within 24 hours, the Pentagon received calls from senators, congressmen, veterans organizations, and thousands of ordinary Americans demanding action. 3 days later, Jimmy received a phone call that made him cry for the first time since his wife died. "Mr. Murphy, this is the President of the United States." I was sitting with Jimmy when the call came, and I watched his face go through about 6 different expressions before settling on wonder. "Yes, sir, Mr. President." "Mr. Murphy, I've reviewed your service record and the recommendation for the Medal of Honor. I want you to know that your wait is over. We're going to hold a ceremony at the White House next week on your birthday to present you with the recognition you should have received 70 years ago. Mr. President, I don't know what to say." "Mr. Murphy, you don't need to say anything. This country owes you a debt we can never fully repay. The least we can do is honor you while you're here to receive it." The White House ceremony was set for November 15th, Jimmy's 83rd birthday. But 3 days before the ceremony, we almost lost him. Jimmy collapsed at home and was rushed to the VA hospital. The cancer had spread to his brain, and his doctors weren't sure he'd be strong enough to travel to Washington. Katie flew in from West Point, taking emergency leave. She spent 2 days by Jimmy's bedside, holding his hand, talking to him even when he wasn't conscious. "Great-grandpa, you have to fight. You've waited 70 years for this moment. You can't quit now." On November 13th, Jimmy opened his eyes and looked at Katie. "Sweetheart, am I still going to get my medal?" "Yes, Great-grandpa, the President is waiting for you." "Then help me get out of this bed. I've got a mission to complete." Jimmy Murphy arrived at the White House in a wheelchair, wearing his dress blue Marine Corps uniform that Katie had found in his closet and had tailored to fit his frail frame. He was weak, barely able to stay awake for more than an hour at a time, but he was alert and determined. The ceremony was held in the East Room with Jimmy's family, surviving Marines from his unit, military officials, and members of Congress in attendance. I was there, too, in the front row, wearing my own dress uniform, prouder than I'd ever been to know this man. When the president entered the room, everyone stood except Jimmy, who saluted from his wheelchair. The president walked directly to Jimmy and returned his salute. "Sergeant Murphy, 73 years ago, you demonstrated conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of your life above and beyond the call of duty. Today, on behalf of a grateful nation, it is my honor to present you with the Medal of Honor." As the president placed the medal around Jimmy's neck, he leaned down and whispered something that only Jimmy could hear. Later, Jimmy told me what the president had said. "This belongs to you, Marine. It always belonged to you." Jimmy's response was pure Jimmy Murphy. "Sir, this belongs to the 23 Marines I couldn't save fast enough." The citation was read aloud, describing in detail Jimmy's actions at Chosin Reservoir, how he'd stayed behind with wounded Marines, fought off enemy forces for 6 hours, and personally carried or assisted 23 Marines to safety under fire. When the ceremony ended, Jimmy was surrounded by the 3 surviving Marines he'd saved. These old men, all in their late 80s and early 90s, embraced their savior and thanked him for giving them 70 years of life they might not have had. "Jimmy," said one of them, "I named my son after you. He's a Marine, too, now, deployed in the Middle East. When he comes home, I'm going to tell him he's named after a Medal of Honor recipient." The ceremony made headlines around the world. Jimmy Murphy became the oldest living Medal of Honor recipient, and his story sparked a national conversation about historical injustices in military recognition. But for me, the most important moment came that evening, back in Jimmy's hospital room, when he looked at Katie and me and said something I'll never forget. "Frank, Katie, I want you both to know something. Getting this medal isn't the victory. The victory is that people finally know the truth. The victory is that other veterans who've been forgotten might get the recognition they deserve. The victory is that young Marines like Katie will make sure this kind of discrimination never happens again." Jimmy Murphy died peacefully on December 16, 2023, exactly 31 days after receiving his Medal of Honor. He spent those 31 days receiving visitors, giving interviews, and making sure his story would outlive him. Katie was with him when he died, holding his hand, reading him letters from Marines around the world who'd been inspired by his story. His funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery, a special dispensation that allowed him to be buried among America's heroes. Hundreds of Marines attended, from recent veterans to old-timers who remembered Korea. The funeral was just the beginning of Jimmy's final mission. 2 weeks after Jimmy died, Katie received a call from Netflix. They wanted to make a documentary about Jimmy's story, focusing on the systematic discrimination he'd faced and the young woman who'd fought to expose the truth. The Lost Honor, James Murphy's 70-year battle, premiered 8 months later to critical acclaim. The documentary revealed the broader pattern of religious and ethnic discrimination in 1950s military recognition, leading to the discovery of 47 other veterans who'd been denied appropriate honors. The film sparked congressional hearings on historical military justice. A permanent historical review commission was established to investigate potentially discriminatory decisions in military recognition. Katie graduated from West Point in the top 10% of her class, commissioned as a second lieutenant in military intelligence. She specialized in historical analysis and made it her career mission to investigate wrongful denials of military honors. She established the James Murphy Foundation, which helps families research potentially denied military recognition and provides legal assistance for appeals. In its first year, the foundation processed over 200 cases and helped secure recognition for dozens of forgotten veterans. But the moment that would have made Jimmy proudest came exactly 1 year after his death. Katie called me with news that brought tears to my eyes. "Frank, Congress just approved a Congressional Gold Medal for Great-Grandpa. It's going to be presented posthumously at his gravesite on what would have been his 84th birthday. The Congressional Gold Medal ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery, with Katie accepting the award on behalf of her great-grandfather. She wore her Army dress uniform, carried herself with the bearing of a Murphy, and spoke words that Jimmy would have been proud of. "My great-grandfather used to say that some battles take 70 years to win, but they're still worth fighting. Today, we're not just honoring James Murphy. We're honoring every veteran who served with honor but died without recognition. We're promising that their stories matter, their service counts, and their sacrifices will never be forgotten." After the ceremony, Katie and I visited Jimmy's grave. His headstone now displays both the Medal of Honor and Congressional Gold Medal, along with an inscription Katie had chosen. "Semper Fidelis, 70 years late, but never too late." As we stood there, Katie told me something Jimmy had written in a letter he'd given her before he died. "Frank, he wanted me to give you this." The letter was written in Jimmy's careful handwriting. "Frank, thank you for believing in me when nobody else would. Thank you for helping me fight the last battle of my war. You taught me that it's never too late to find a brother in arms. Katie is going to carry on the mission now. Make sure she remembers that some fights are worth having, even when you're 82 years old and running out of time. Semper Fi, Jimmy." I folded the letter carefully and put it in my pocket. "Katie, your great-grandfather was right about something. Some battles do take 70 years to win. But they're worth fighting because they're not really about the people who start them. They're about the people who come after." "What do you mean?" "Jimmy didn't fight for his medal so he could feel better about himself. He fought so that young Marines like you would never have to wonder if their service counts, regardless of their religion, their background, or their last name." 3 years later, Katie called me with her biggest success yet. "Frank, the foundation just helped secure Medal of Honor recognition for a Navajo Marine from World War II. His family had been fighting for recognition for 60 years. Jimmy would be proud. Frank, there's something else. The Marine Corps asked me to speak at the next Medal of Honor ceremony. They want me to talk about Great-Grandpa's story and what it means for modern military recognition." "What are you going to tell them?" "I'm going to tell them that honor isn't about the medals you wear on your chest. It's about the Marines you carry in your heart. And I'm going to tell them that America's promise to its warriors isn't complete until every hero gets the recognition they've earned, no matter how long it takes. Last month, I received an invitation that brought everything full circle. Katie had been promoted to captain and was being transferred to the Pentagon, where she'd be working on military awards policy. At her promotion ceremony, she asked me to pin on her captain's bars, "Frank, Great-Grandpa always said you were the brother he never had. I want you to know that you're family to me, too." As I pinned those captain's bars on Katie's uniform, I thought about Jimmy Murphy, sitting on his porch for 70 years, telling stories that nobody believed. I thought about the Medal of Honor that should have been his from the beginning, and the young woman who'd made sure truth finally won over bureaucracy. Most of all, I thought about something Jimmy had told me near the end. "Frank, I used to think I failed those 23 Marines because I couldn't save them all fast enough. But Katie taught me something. I didn't fail them. I carried them with me for 70 years, and now their story will live forever." That's what Marines do. We carry each other, no matter how long it takes. These days, when people ask me about my neighbor Jimmy Murphy, I tell them the truth. I lived next door to one of the bravest Marines who ever lived, and I was too stupid to recognize it for 15 years. But I also tell them about Katie Murphy, the young officer who proved that some debts can be paid even after 70 years, and that America's promise to its warriors is only as good as the people willing to fight for it. Jimmy Murphy's final mission wasn't just getting his Medal of Honor. It was making sure that every forgotten veteran's story gets told, every delayed recognition gets awarded, and every young service member knows that their honor matters more than politics or prejudice. That's a mission worth completing, no matter how long it takes. And that, my friends, is how an 82-year-old Marine taught a 68-year-old soldier what it really means to leave no one behind.